Good morning. Good morning and welcome to Emerging Threats Monday. Let's go ahead and get set up here. Looks like we got 4 folks on so far. Good morning and welcome to Emerging Threats Monday. Not sure my laptop is going to work or not, but we'll see how that goes. 11 folks on so far. Looks like we'll be getting started real soon. Good morning, Warrior Nation. Let me know where you're from this morning. If you're a coin member, throw your coin up. Let's see here. Alan Kelly is on. Rasmic is on. Doug Lightfoot is on. Nova, good morning. Jesse Ross is on. Dr. John Eden. Robert is on. Will is on. Adam is on. Looks like we got 23 folks on. Looks like my computer I may not be able to see all your comments that's coming in this morning. Richard said, good morning from Trinidad. Good morning. Joseph is on from Vermont. We're talking about an economic collapse this morning as being our emerging threat. And if you're just joining me, my name is Rich Brown. I'm the co-host and co-founder of the American Warrior Society and the American Warrior Show, America's #1 self-defense podcast. And here on Emerging Threats Monday, we always try to pick out a threat that you need to be concerned with. And before I go much further, guys, let me know if my volume's good. Susan is on, John is on, Mr. Bob Bill is on, coin number 26, Rudy is on. Got a lot of folks on, 31 folks on this morning. Let me know. Chad Ray is on. Says Alabama's 38 degrees and breezy. Yeah, we're about 36 degrees here. Will is on. Good morning. Okay, guys, like I said, we're going to talk about an economic collapse this morning as being the emerging threat we probably need to have on our radar screen somewhere. Got some pretty unprecedented times going on right now. So welcome to Emerging Threats Money. Let's jump into it. If you're looking for swag, you can always find it on the links that I provided in the show notes. We got some of these coffee cups, the American Warrior Show coffee cup. You want to check that out. They have your coin number and name put on the back of it. Pretty cool. But what is the economy? Well, it's how societies use their limited resources. That's the most shortened definition of it. But economics is the social science that deals with trying to understand how societies make use of those goods and services and limited resources. And what's interesting about calling it a social science means it's, even though that economists use predictive models and scientific methods and mathematics to try to determine what groups and individuals do. So in that regard, it's probably more akin to than my degree, which is in social psychology. I've always been fascinated by why people do what they do, especially when they get into groups. They can get pretty crazy. So let's see who all's jumping on. We got 39 folks this morning. Mike Reagan, another Chief Warrant Officer's on. Always good to have that. Sydney is on. Let me know if my volume's good. I think somebody said it, but like I said, my feed here on my laptop's froze, so we'll just have to keep rolling. So an economic collapse is when the economy no longer works. For some reason, it's a broad-ranging different economic conditions, ranging from prolonged severe depression brought on by deflation to hyperinflation, which we're going to talk about mostly today. And these are normally accompanied with civil unrest, chaos, breakdown in law and order. But when you think about the economy, one of the main takeaways here that I want you to rewire your brain, I think a lot of us have a tendency to think of, where is this economy at? I want to see it. Show me the brick and mortar building that I can point at and go, there's the American economy. And I hate to tell you, folks, the economy is me and you and our relationship to each other and our relationship to finite resources like a box of ammunition. I mean, we all of us that are on here this morning are probably shooters, and we remember when 9mm ammo was damn near impossible to get. So that is the economy, our relationship to each other and our relationship to our scarce resources. Now, we have something that helps us control all this here in the United States of America. We have the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve is that body, that quasi-governmental body that runs our monetary policies. Matter of fact, they're responsible for 4 things. The number one thing is monetary policies. And they do this by influencing money and credit to do 2 basic things as part of their monetary policy. The first one is to keep employment at or near 100%, making sure that everybody that wants a job can get a job. The second thing that they do with regard to monetary policy is that they stabilize prices, so that if you go in to buy a gallon of milk today, it's going to be pretty much the same thing as it was yesterday and the day before, and will be the same thing in a month from now. So that's very important. The second thing the Fed does for us is that they supervise and regulate banks. And they don't always do a good job at it, as we learned in 2008. The third thing they do is maintain the stability of our financial system. And the fourth thing that they do is governmental services for the government. Now, the Fed has a couple levers it can pull with regard to monetary policy. It can buy assets, or it can control interest rates, raise or lower interest rates. So that's the 2 levers it has. If it buys assets, it's something called quantitative easing, pumping money into the economy, making money out of thin air. Or it can control rates. So when I was preparing for this show, it got me thinking, because I'm imagining the Fed, somebody actually pulling levers, which we know that's not really the way it works. But this metaphor kept floating around in my head, and it reminded me of something that this philosophy professor, I think her name was Foote, came up with. It's called the trolley dilemma. Let's take a look at it real quick. That's why I got my dry erase board here behind me. So here's the trolley tracks. Train's heading in this direction. It's unstoppable. The brakes are off. And if the train keeps going this direction, it's going to run over and kill these 3 folks. Or you have a decision to make. You can throw the lever and have it only run over 1 person. And this is a good example where there are no great choices. You have to pick from a variety of bad choices. And that, to me, is kind of what the government was forced to do when we got into this pandemic. You can keep the economy moving and potentially kill millions of your citizens with the coronavirus, or you can shut down the economy to save some people, but you destroy your economy and potentially kill more people. So this trolley dilemma is an interesting way of thinking. Do I kill 3 or do I kill 1? Either way, you're killing somebody. It's bad choices. But I was watching a Swedish economist on YouTube the other day, and he said that this perhaps isn't a good analogy for it. He said a better analogy might be this one. You have a runaway train once again. Only this time, we know there are people that are stuck on the tracks here and they can't get off. We just don't know how many are in each tunnel. So the consequences of our choices are unknown because we're in unprecedented times. So I think I agree with him, and I wish I could pronounce the gentleman's name because he's absolutely right. By throwing the lever and shutting down the economy, we have diverted the train from its trajectory, but what is going to be the damage, no one seems to know. So maybe this is a better way of thinking about it. And this is scary, the unknown. So all they can do is try to look at the models, be it in the COVID-19 models or the economic models, to try to determine what is laying on the tracks in front of us. But we got to be honest, we really don't know. So we talked about the Fed, how it can buy assets, create money with quantitative easing, or it can raise and lower interest rates. That's how it does its function of regulating monetary policy, which leads us to the discussion of money. Okay, it's creating money out of thin air. Money is a generally recognized medium of exchange, and that's going to be important to understand here in just a moment. It's a medium of exchange for transactional purposes in an economy. Money in of itself has no value, no intrinsic value. You can't take this dollar bill and stuff it in your gas tank and make your car go. You can't eat it. It has no intrinsic value. It's to print this dollar bill, I think it cost the U.S. Treasury Department 17 cents. And to print a $100 bill, it costs a little bit more than that because of the security features, but not much. So money has no value, which leads us into a discussion of what are the three types of money. And this is important to understand all this as a framework before we get into an economic collapse. What causes it? What do they look like? The first thing we have is commodity money. That's where you have, like we talked about a second ago, a box of ammunition, right? This has value to us shooters. It's cheap ammo, but it does have value. Or you could have something like a carton of eggs. A carton of eggs has value. You can eat a carton of eggs. 4-pound bag of sugar. This thing right here may be $1 or $2 now, but guess what? In an economic collapse, hyperinflation, this could be worth millions and millions and millions of dollars. Not because sugar got any better, but the value of your dollar tanked. Or CBD oil, like our sponsor, Appalachian Standard, right? This has value. I need this to sleep and for my joints to work well. So they are a sponsor of the American Warrior Show, the American Warrior Society, but this is a commodity. So commodity money is the first type of money. The second type of money is going to be representative money. Now, I had a silver certificate when I was born back in the 60s. Yeah, I'm getting old. We had these things called silver certificates. Now, the interesting thing is they look just like a dollar bill, but if you read the fine print up here, it said silver certificate. And it read on there, you can redeem the Treasury Department for $1 worth of silver. That's representative money. And then there is fiat money, and it's money that's breathed into life because we say it has value. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is fiat money. It just has value because we here in America say that it has value. Otherwise, it really doesn't. Speaking of America, leads me into thinking that since the birth of our nation, we have had all three types of money. Before 1792, we used foreign currency here in the United States of America as a medium of exchange. And then 1792, we had the Coinage Act. And when the Coinage Act came around, we started printing coins using precious metal, i.e. commodities. We had a gold coin, a silver coin, a copper penny. And that meant that we were on commodity. When you traded this amongst American citizens, you were trading a commodity, a precious metal. And then around 1900, we got on the gold standard. And then in that case, your dollar or your $100 bill was backed by gold that was sitting somewhere. And then in 1971, Richard Nixon waved his magic wand and breathed fiat currency into life, and the United States got off the gold standard. But to understand fiat money, you really need to understand something called the Tinkerbell effect. If you've heard of the Tinkerbell effect, let me know. Like I said, my computer's froze, so unfortunately, I can't interact with you as much as I'd like to, but I'm watching your comments. So if you've heard of the Tinkerbell effect, give me a thumbs up. I hadn't until I was preparing for this. And to prepare for Emerging Threats Monday, man, takes me days of research and study. But let's check this out. The Tinkerbell effect. Here we go. Feel like Glenn Beck kind of. Okay, so here's the Tinkerbell effect in a nutshell. On this side of the chart, we have percentage of people who believe something. We have false, true, false, and the irrational actions based on that belief. Now, some of this, I'll be honest with you, I've modified it a little bit from the things I read on the Tinkerbell effect because I think there's a bigger lesson here. There's the Tinkerbell effect and there's the reverse. I kind of put them together on one chart to illustrate something. At first, the percentage of people who believe something is very low. But over time, the more that you see your friends and neighbors believe something, the more apt you are to believe something. And I'll use, for example, the Titanic. I've been using the Titanic for a lot of my analogies recently, and let's keep using that. When the Titanic was built, the marketing says this is an unsinkable ship. It can't sink. And that, at first, everybody don't believe that the ship can't sink. And then eventually, okay, yeah, I'm looking at the science here, the way you've built this ship. It's made out of iron with the latest and greatest technology of the early 20th century. I believe you. This ship can't sink. The president of White Star Lines believed it couldn't sink. The captain of the ship believed it couldn't sink. Hell, the designer believed pretty much it couldn't sink. So guess what? The ship can't sink. And you start acting irrationally based on the belief that it can't sink. And you make it true, more or less. So what happens is, the Titanic's maiden voyage, we all know the story, folks. Drop the hammer, let's get to New York and show folks what this ship can do. Let's just wring it out and wear it out, okay? I'm sorry this is backwards. I realize that. We'll flip it around for you next time. But bear with me here, okay? False. It became true. So, you have a guy named Frederick Fleet. And Frederick Fleet was supposed to be in the crow's nest that night the Titanic hit the iceberg. True story. Frederick Fleet says, I need binoculars, man. I need to be able to see the icebergs farther ahead so that I can warn the ship. And of course, everybody's like, bro, you don't need binoculars. This is an unsinkable ship, man. We can hit all the damn icebergs we want. This is not a problem. So they put him up in the crow's nest that night without binoculars. So again, because we believe the ship can't sink, we act irrationally. Okay? And what happens based on those irrational beliefs? We start acting stupid. And the Tinkerbell effect is destroyed. And it becomes false. The ship does sink. Another example might be cars. Here in America, we've manufactured cars that are so safe. They got airbags all over the place. We mandated that by law that we have to wear a seatbelt. We've got crumple zones and roll cages, and we drive like idiots because we have this idea that, well, cars are safer than they've ever been. You know, you're not going to get hurt. So we act irrationally. Fiat currency is the same thing. We feel like here in America, to get away from the analogy for a second, that the Fed can print, they said quantitative easing, printing money to buy toxic assets in a lot of cases. We can do this infinity. Quote, to infinity and beyond. We can print all the damn money we want and nothing bad is going to happen. Well, folks, I'll tell you, in the history of fiat currency, every time a government does that, it leads to hyperinflation. It just does. We might have to go through stagnation first, stagflation, I should say, because there's three really bad economic conditions. There's deflation, which is what the Great Depression was. There's stagflation, which is what we had in the 1970s, for those of us that remember. And then we have hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is when you have a weak economy, large government debt, and uncontrolled increase in money supply. Does that sound like what we have right now? Let me read that to you again. A weak economy, not our fault. We had a great economy, but we chose to do some things to it to help ourselves right now, or so we think, and weakened our economy. The government took on a lot of debt back in 2008 when it did quantitative easing the first time, and it purchased a lot of toxic mortgage-backed securities. That $4 trillion that the Fed bought is still sitting on its books. The Fed was going to try to get it off, and if you look at the graphs, they started getting it off, and then here comes the pandemic, and now they're going to buy, probably they say $2 trillion worth of stimulus. It's going to probably be $6 or $8 trillion worth of stimulus that goes on top of what they already had purchased. Now, like I said, normally before you get to hyperinflation, you go through stagflation. And that's when there's been, like in 1970s, we had the oil embargo. And the oil embargo happened for a couple of reasons. Number one, Nixon took us off the gold standard, and the OPEC was afraid to give us any oil because our money may not be worth anything. OPEC also was pretty upset with us because we chose to give the Israelis some money to fight their war with against some members of the OPEC nation. So you had a couple things that were working against us, and they said, we're not going to sell oil to you anymore. What did that lead to? It led to stagflation, low gross domestic product, high unemployment, low demand, and high inflation. So the Fed pulled on its levers and finally got us out of the mess, but it led us into a recession in order to get out of it. That was how they stopped the inflation. Now, here's the thing. I'm going to talk primarily a lot about Rhodesia and Zimbabwe. This is a 1976, I don't know if you can see that or not, Rhodesian $2 bill. And when this thing was printed, the Rhodesian dollar in 1976 was outperforming the U.S. currency. Then, over the course of about 30 years, you have this. I don't know if you can see that or not. The $100 trillion Zimbabwean note. See, Rhodesia in 1980 became the country of Zimbabwe overnight. And Robert Mugabe took over as president, and he did some terrible economic policies that took the once prosperous Rhodesia, the jewel of Africa, the Switzerland of Africa, that had an economy, even though they were under economic sanctions by the world for breaking away and signing the Unilateral Declaration of Independence in 1965 and saying, hey man, we're breaking away from the United Kingdom and we're going to be our own nation, just like our pals, the United States. And how did the world respond to it? Did they embrace Rhodesia and say, hey, cool, man, I appreciate that. You want to be just like us? No, we put sanctions on them. And there's a whole lot of reasons for that. Not going to get into it. But then Robert Mugabe comes in and he says, you know what, man? I got my own printing press now. I can print all the money I want. And that didn't work out. Hyperinflation does a couple of things. We talked about weak economy, large government debt, uncontrolled money supply. But hyperinflation can actually help some people. Here's who hyperinflation helps. Let's say, it was Wendy's on. She said, good evening from Perth, Australia, originally from Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, the breadbasket of Africa. Yeah, Wendy, I'll weep for your former country. We'll talk more about Rhodesia and Zimbabwe here in a minute, and it saddens me what happened there because a lot of people starve to death needlessly. And that's one of the bad things about hyperinflation, folks. Your money becomes worthless. Here's who it could help, though, hyperinflation. Let's say I bought a house in Harare, which is the capital of Zimbabwe. It used to be Salisbury. I go and I purchased this home in Harare back in, let's say, 2005. Well, by 2006, 2007, with hyperinflation, I walk in the bank one day, and instead of buying a Coca-Cola, I pay off my mortgage. If you had money in the Bank of Zimbabwe, overnight, it's basically gone. Let's say you worked hard and you saved your money. Well, suddenly $50,000 or $100,000, whatever you saved, that's what it's going to cost to get a chicken salad sandwich today and a Coke. So if you save money, it's wiped out. Gold, it does extremely well in hyperinflation. The Zimbabwean hyperinflation at one point was 6.5 sextillion%. That's 6.5 with 22 zeros behind it. Prices doubled every 24 hours. The denomination, the Rhodesian dollar, was redenominated 4 times. Matter of fact, the Zimbabwe come up with this thing, said Zero to Hero program. Guys, here's how we're going to help you. Remember how on Friday a loaf of bread in your favorite supermarket in Harare cost you $85,000 for a loaf of bread? You don't have to worry about that because on Monday morning we're issuing new currency and we're going to redenominate it and we're knocking off 3 zeros, and on Monday it's going to cost you $85. Isn't that a deal? But when you do things like that, your people start losing faith in the dollar. Oh, you can just knock zeros off, then none of it really means anything. At the end of the Zimbabwe hyperinflation, their economic collapse over there, 35 quadrillion Zimbabwean dollars, let me say that again, 35 quadrillion Zimbabwean dollars was worth $1 US. Now here's what's important to understand. As Wendy can tell you, Wendy is from Rhodesia in Zimbabwe and now lives in Australia. I'm glad you got out of there, Wendy. Same country, folks. This is the same country, same people, same economic conditions, same arable land, same mineral wealth that's in the ground. Look at Venezuela. It has the largest oil reserves in the world, and it is one of the poorest nations in the world. Because once hyperinflation takes off, it's a problem. Let's see what Wendy says here. Zimbabwe money in 1999, toilet roll cost $700, only 72 sheets in a roll, cheaper to take your money and wipe your butt with it. Wow. And this is somebody that knows. Why did it happen? Well, there's a thing called the Land Reform Act. I'm not really going to get into it right now because people feel differently about it. But just to give you an example of what Wendy's saying, in 2008, to purchase one egg cost $50 billion to buy one egg. $50 billion. A bus ticket in the capital of Harare cost you, serious as a heart attack, folks, cost you $100 trillion. A loaf of bread in 2008, for what it cost to buy a loaf of bread in 2008, if you go back 10 years earlier, you could have bought 12 brand new cars with that. So here again is the problem. In hyperinflation, you want to spend that money quick because the money you start out with in your pocket that morning is going to be worthless by the end of the day, or it's going to have diminished value. So why hold on to it? If you look at any of the documentaries surrounding the hyperinflation in Zimbabwe or Venezuela or Hungary or the Germany, what you'll see is lines of cars. First thing people do in the morning is line up for cars, line up to get gas because the purchasing power of the dollar is gone by the end of the day. They'll line up at the ATM. The government starts tightening down on controls and says you can only take out so much money. We're going to control this, and one of the ways we're going to do it is through price control. And I would submit that the market has to determine the price. When we start tinkering with price controls, and Richard Nixon did it in the 1970s, folks, you create a problem. So when you hear these things like price gouging based upon the hand sanitizer or toilet paper, you got to let those prices go, because if you start trying to control the price, like Robert Mugabe did, he said that the price of bread, I'm going to fix it in stone, and I'm going to put your butt in prison if you change the price of bread. People need to buy a loaf of bread. You can't sell a loaf of bread for anything more than whatever. So bakers go, dude, but to do that, a carton of eggs, I have to pay somebody for that carton of eggs to make that bread and pay for the flour and the butter, etc. You can't just fix the price in stone. I have to buy these materials from somebody else. They cost me money. So to get around, so they didn't go to prison, the bakers would stick like a raisin inside the bread and call it cake to get around the governmental laws. So what does Zimbabwe do to try to get out of it? One of the things they tried is something that Brazil did really well, and that is real-time gross settlement, the RTGS. And this was an attempt to get off foreign currency, because what happened was by 2009, Zimbabwe had to abandon their money. It was worthless. So then they started relying on the US dollar. Well, another problem with hyperinflation is, and why do I keep talking about hyperinflation? Because going back to what I said a little while ago, folks, you can't print money to infinity. You can't. There is a finite amount at which time people will stop believing in your money. And when they do, they get into the black market. More than 80% of this is their numbers, more than 80% of the Zimbabwean economy was outside the normal economy, meaning the black market. Because there you could trade in rand, you could trade in US dollars, you could trade in the euro, a whole host of currencies, which further devalued the Zimbabwean dollar, which is why they said, we'll put you in prison if we catch you trading foreign currencies. So let's talk about how they tried to fix it. They tried to go with the real-time gross settlement, and they pegged it to the US dollar at a 1-to-1 ratio. It didn't work. It collapsed last year. But Brazil did do it, and Brazil did it once they saw that the value of their dollar was going down. People didn't believe in the dollar anymore because the government was just printing it like crazy. They instituted something really clever called the real value unit. See, we got to make people believe again. We got to get this thing swinging up again. This dollar's collapsing. People don't believe in that anymore, but I bet you they'll believe in this. The RVU, real value unit. Doesn't that sound confidence inspiring? So they introduced the RVU, and people started believing again. How do they do that? This is interesting. What they did was they said, look, man, we realize our money is having some problems, so let's do this. Let's peg it to the real value unit, okay? The real value unit, this thing that they made up, Tinkerbell effect, this fiat money, this fake money, the real value unit is tied to a US dollar. And it's a one-for-one thing. So they made all the stores in Brazil, you had to give the current Brazilian dollar rate and you had to give the RVU rate. So what you would see is every day you'd go to buy something and the cost of that good would continue to go up, and your Brazilian money, because they're suffering hyperinflation, but that real value unit stayed constant. Okay? You go in to buy a thing of milk. One day it's $50,000. But the RVU is 1.5. The next day it's $60,000. But the RVU is still 1.5. So over time, a year or so, finally they go, you know what, we're going to scrap our currency. We'll just use the RVU. I mean, that's the real value unit. That's what's real. And it became real out of thin air because they said it did. I'm telling you, folks, it gets weird because it is the Tinkerbell effect. That the money, once people stop believing, they stop believing. Hungary was probably the worst hyperinflation ever. 1946, prices in Hungary doubled every 15 hours. And that may not sound like a lot, but it's insane. Before hyperinflation, the Zimbabwean dollar traded at $1.25 per US dollar. So it was pretty strong for an African dollar. But by the end of the hyperinflation, $100 trillion bill, the one I just showed you, had the same exchange rate. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me say this another way. This $100 trillion bill, if it still had the same exchange rate, I don't know if you guys can see this. This is a real Zimbabwean money here, or was. They canceled it. If this were real at a $1.25 exchange rate, this would be worth all the money on the earth twice. That's hyperinflation, but it's worthless. Zimbabwe's hyperinflation, just to give you a little bit more, had a monthly inflation rate of 79.6 billion% a month. But Hungary's was higher, 41.9 quadrillion% per month. Now, you want your economy to have a little bit of inflation. A little bit of inflation is good. Most developed countries have anywhere from 1 to 5% of inflation every year, and that's fine. At a healthy 3% inflation rate, you would see prices doubling every 23 years, not every 15 hours. Does that make sense? So if a carton of milk today costs $2, 23 years from now, it's going to be $4. So it went from $2 to $4, but it took 23 years to get there. It didn't take 15 hours to get there. In 1946, at the height of Hungary's issues, they issued one of their dollar bills was 100 million billion pango note. In 1941, for context, 5 pangos would get you $1 US. In 1946, all the Hungarian pangos that they had issued, all the 100 million billion pango notes and all the money that was circulating in Hungary, if you piled it into a pile and said, what's that worth relative to the US dollar? It was, all of that was equal to 1/10 of 1 penny. That's hyperinflation. Now, have we seen hyperinflation in the US? You're going, Rich, we'll never see it here. This is, once again, brother, you're presenting a problem that is really a Hungary problem, a Venezuela problem, a Brazil problem. a Zimbabwe problem. It's never happened here. It's never going to happen here. Folks, it's happened here. We had hyperinflation here in the U.S. to the tune of 5,000 to 7,000%, depending on who you look at. And if you're going, I'm not familiar with that, how come I didn't study that in school? The reason you didn't probably is because you're from the North. If you're a Southerner, your ancestors went through some serious hyperinflation before their dollar was destroyed. So that by 1864, during the dark days of the Civil War, us down here in the South, we were going through hyperinflation. And you're going to say, Rich, why did that happen? Because up in the North at the time, they were still using stuff like this, commodity money. This is 1 ounce of silver coin. I think this is the Morgan. It's a 1921 silver coin. It's made out of sterling silver. The Confederacy said, we don't have much of that stuff, so we're going to do something called fiat money. Does that sound familiar? Because that's what we have now in the U.S. The Confederacy said, we can't afford to raise taxes because we're going to just tear our little Confederate states of rebels apart. So what are we going to have to do? Can't raise taxes. Don't have a whole lot of precious metals. We'll just print money. We'll just print money. And for a while it worked until finally it didn't. We're doing the same thing here in the United States of America. And like I said, there are no historical references that I'm aware of where you take fiat money and you print it to infinity and it still retains value. Now, these are unprecedented times. They're unprecedented because we've never been in the grips of a pandemic worldwide where we're going to see something like that. Okay? We don't know what the outcome is going to be because normally these are things that happen to individual countries based on some sort of supply shock or war or famine or something like that. These are things that cause hyperinflation. But what happens when this is happening worldwide? I don't know. And I don't think any of us know, which goes back to the trolley problem. What lies ahead of us in the tunnel? If we start yanking on levers to control things, the Fed drops interest rates to zero, quantitative easing to infinity, what is going to be the outcome? I have no idea, and I don't think anybody knows. So, remember, it can happen here. It has happened here with the Confederate dollar. For those of us that had ancestors that told stories about it, it was pretty grim. Because like Wendy said, they were using it in their outhouses to wipe their rear ends with. It was absolutely worthless. So anyway, this has been Emerging Threats Monday, folks. Thanks for staying with me for 35 minutes here. It's something to definitely think about. What can you do to protect yourself? Precious metals. The cost of gold right now is going through the roof. I mean, I think it's trading over $1,700 an ounce already. It's just going to continue to go up as people search for where can they put their money, because right now the petrodollar ain't looking so good and we just keep printing that money. What's going to happen to the $4 trillion worth of 2008 toxic mortgage-backed securities? Never going to be worth anything, that are still sitting on the Fed's books. Now they're putting more to the tune of who knows how much. They're saying 2 trillion, could be 6 trillion. Look what Zimbabwe did, 100 trillion, just like that. How did that work out? It doesn't, folks. We need to be responsible. So I know I've kept you on here quite a while. Unfortunately, my computer is down hard. I can't see your comments, but I really appreciate you joining me this morning, guys. Give you something to think about. If you can get out of debt, get out of debt. I mean, they're giving us stimulus money, and what they want you to do with the stimulus money is get out there and buy stuff in the economy. Increase the velocity of money is what they call it, so that companies can go to investment banks, buy more resources and keep the economy moving. But what happens when people take their stimulus checks and pay off debt? It may help the individual, but it doesn't help the economy. So these things are pretty interesting, pretty crazy times we're living in. So this has been Emerging Threats Monday. We're talking about hyperinflation. I won't keep you on here any longer. Just give you something to think about. Don't forget the Tinkerbell effect. Brazil found a way to get themselves out of it with the real value unit. In Zimbabwe, it didn't work out. So these kind of things don't always work out. Once the people stop believing, and remember, the people is the economy. The people, our relationship to each other and our relationship to our limited resources is what the economy is. When you hear people say, I'm not worried about the economy, we need to save lives. Folks, those are lives. The economy is equal to people. Anyway, thanks for joining me, guys. I really appreciate your time this morning on Emerging Threats Monday. Please remember, the fight is coming. Be ready.